Hey everyone, my name is Jace, aka Gemballs, and I'm a solo developer and content creator. And yesterday I started with Godot 4.1 for the first time ever. Actually, I'd never used any other Godot before. It was literally my first day with Godot. But I have made games before, and I've been a game developer for quite a while. But I ran into some issues here and there. And I kind of feel like making today the video that I wish I had yesterday, with all the information about using Godot 4.1 with VS Code in C# and setting up building and debugging and all that kind of stuff. So this video is going to contain everything that you need to get it up and running with some decent build configurations, giving you some extra options to do certain things. And I also want to break down literally everything that's there, so that it's explained and so it's out there. Because if you're like me, I saw a bunch of things online, I copy pasted things, and it was kind of hard for me to find like concise information in one place, tying everything together. All I ever got was like working examples that either didn't work or didn't quite do what I wanted, and I found it a little bit tricky to sort of like, figure it out myself. So I want to make this video here that should hopefully demystify that whole process, give you some links to places where you can, get more information if you want to do any other further modifications yourself, and yeah, just get you on, get you going, get you Godot'ing. Yeah, I'm sorry. Also, this is my first time using VS Code too. I actually hadn't used it before. Yeah, let's just get into it and see how this works. Now, in order to do this in VS Code, at least, you need a couple things. You need this launch.json file and a tasks.json file. And in it, you're going to have all these specifications for like what you need to like build and like run and debug your game. And if you've never done this before, this maybe looks a little daunting. Like, what are all these things? How is it supposed to work? First, I'm going to show you what my build configurations are, just so you know what sort of features it has, I suppose. And then I'm also going to talk about a couple dependencies that they need. Let's talk about what it has. So this gives 4 options here. I've defined 4, and there's a launch option. So I can build. This will build my code, launch my game, and then it will also debug my game. So that's why I've hit a breakpoint here. So I've got a breakpoint here set on my code. This runs every frame, and so we immediately hit this breakpoint. I'll get rid of the breakpoint, run, and you'll see that here's my terrible game. Okay, and then likewise, if I set that breakpoint again, we're going to hit the breakpoint. So we've built the game, run the game, we're debugging the game. Good. All right. The next feature we have here is launch and select scene. So what this means is that we can now launch our game, but we can specify what scene we want to use. So if I click this again, we get this drop down here, and we can see this test scene, this empty scene, and there's nothing else in here. It's just our scenes. I'll choose test scene. That's my default one. So we're going to end up getting the same thing from before. And of course, this is debugging. So we can see we've hit the breakpoint, right? And I can also select another scene, like empty scene, which is just an empty scene that doesn't have anything. There it is, gray screen, nothing here. We have another option here, which is launch editor. This doesn't make much sense for me at all. This launches the editor with my current project, and the debugger I think is attached, but I don't have the source files, so this doesn't really do anything for me. There's not really a great use case here, but it's very easy to set this up in case you do have the source files and you want to debug the editor yourself. And lastly, there's an attached to process. And so that's pretty good. So like, what are some dependencies or things that this kind of relies on? The first dependency that you're going to need is the .NET SDK, and you can use 6.0 or 7.0, I believe. I believe the later versions of Godot 4 support 7.0. So you just need to go here to the website, links in the description below, and then download whichever one makes sense to you for your system. So I would get the x64 version on Windows and then just install that. So that's the first thing you need. I say that's the first thing you need, but I'm actually assuming that you have the Godot engine. And if you don't, I'll leave a link in the description to this page here where you can get the latest version of Godot 4. And you will want to get the .NET version since we're using C#. This has C# support. So you want to download this version here and not this version here. And then you just extract that zip file somewhere, and that will be your engine. There's a couple extensions that this requires. Well, you'll need C# as the base language support extension here in VS Code anyway. .NET install tool for extension authors, I believe, is a dependency for C#. So I think this either comes with it automatically or you need to download that as well. I've also got the C# tools for Godot. This one, I'm pretty much, in terms of specifically for the build, I'm pretty much only using it for the launch select scene. So if you didn't want to install that, you could just delete this one and then you won't really need it anymore for the build stuff. but there's other things that it might offer that you might want to keep it around. I love this feature to be able to select scene, so I'm keeping C# tools for Godot, and mono debug is also a requirement for C# tools for Godot, the extension. And again, I don't know if you need to download that separately or if it comes automatically, I'm not sure. But if you get these, that's all you need. The other thing that I've got here is this here, which is an environment variable. These are variables that you can set on your PC. I'll show you how you do that real quick right now. If I search for environment variables in my Windows thing, I get edit the system environment variables. This will pop up this window. I can click environment variables. And then if we click this, we can see down here under system variables, we can click new and we can add a variable. So I've got mine called Godot 4. And then in here, this is just the path to the engine.exe file. So we can see here that I already have it. And so that's what this environment variable is. This is basically just the engine.exe file path. You don't have to use the environment variable by any means. You can just put in your engine exe file. You can just do this. That's perfectly fine, right? So you don't have to do this environment variable thing. The reason I do that is if I ever want to move my engine somewhere else, if I ever change to a different version or whatever, I don't have to come back into launch.json and make these changes over and over. Instead, what I can do is I can just change the environment variable and it just kind of works here with the build system automatically. So it's up to you what you want to do. You don't have to do it, but I kind of want to show you that you can use environment variables here because that was a cool thing that I learned too, because I didn't know that before. The only other thing that you need to do now is you need to create a solution. Solution files. So if you go to project, if you go to your engine, you open that up, project, tools, C#, create C# solution. That will create these solution files for you. I'll show you. So here, it'll create these two files and you need those as well for the building process. One other thing that you may need to do is set a default scene for your project to run. So for that, click on project, go to project settings, under application, go to run, and then there'll be a main scene here. Just make sure you set this to one of your scenes because you might need that when running your game from code. One last thing that you should probably do is in editor settings. Where is this? Go to the very bottom, editor. Yeah, external editor, right? This is what, if you're going to open up code from your editor, what application should it use? And here's like your drop down here, right? So you can use the editor that's in Godot, or you can specify something else. I'm using Visual Studio Code, so I just click that. So when I click on this thing here, this is like an attached script. It'll just open this up immediately, the file. Right? So that's nice to have too. So those are the things. If you just have those, and then I'm going to put this launch.json and this tasks.json like on GitHub somewhere, you can just steal these, make sure you replace the exe, and that's it. You're good to go. You're set. You have these options. You're good. Maybe grab these extensions. Okay. And you're good to go. And so you don't need to watch any more of this video. We're actually done here. Okay. But I want to talk about the process that I had of learning this and everything that and break down everything that I tried, and then also share with you certain resources that were helpful for me as well, and how I figured out certain things, because that might help you in your problem solving in the future, or help you just gain a better understanding of how all this works. And it just might be helpful if you want to make any adjustments yourself. Okay, so how do we set this up? So first of all, you need this launch.json, tasks.json file. They need to be in this VS Code folder as well, I believe. But how do we get here? Okay, so let's delete these and we'll start from scratch. I'll delete this folder as well. Okay, we need the build stuff. We need the build configurations. Now in VS Code, if we press Control-Shift-P, we open up this command palette thing with a bunch of commands in there. And you can see here, what we need to do is generate assets for build and debug. Now we've got .NET and we've got C# Godot. C# Godot is the C# tools for Godot extension. This one, okay? And the other one, .NET, I believe is this one or this one. Okay, it's one of these two, okay? But the C# Godot generate assets for build and debug is a function made by this extension developer that will generate those things and will be set up for Godot usage, basically. So initially I was like, yeah, let's use that. So I click it, VS Code folder is made, and launch.json, tasks.json is here. So I can open this up and take a look. First thing I'll notice is that I need to take care of these slashes. These need to be the other way. We can maybe just take this whole thing here, replace it again, and then we should be good to go. I think if the first time you do this, this may not have your path, your engine path in command and executable. It might have something else. And if that's the case, you just need to fill those in here. Okay. Super easy. And then these should just work, right? But the weird thing is that they don't work. they don't work. The plain editor thing didn't really do anything for me when I chose from here. It never launched anything. Whether I had the editor open or closed, I read somewhere that it needed to be open, but it didn't really make a difference for me. Launch does something strange. So the expectation, I thought, was that this should launch the game with a debugger attached so that I can debug stuff, right? So if we launch, we see that we don't get the game. Instead, we get the editor, which is kind of weird. If I start the game here, like maybe I can still debug, right? I mean, the game's here now. So let's set a breakpoint. It doesn't get hit. Okay, so we're not debugging the game. I don't even see any debug tools. So this doesn't seem to be working. So I'll close this now. Now the debug stuff opened up. This is not working as it should. There's a select scene thing, which is kind of interesting. If I press launch, I get to choose between the scenes that are in my project. Let's choose test scene. But it opens the engine again, right? And if I chose empty scene, it would open the engine on this scene still. Like, I mean, it just doesn't seem to work. And then when I close it, the debugger opens up again. There's something not quite right here. And so I was like, this isn't really working. I messed around with this for a while, and this was the first thing I did, and I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't really even realize what should be happening. But what should be happening is it should just run your game, not the editor, with a debugger attached so you can debug your game. And in select scene, it should allow you to select a specific scene in your game and just run that directly with a debugger attached. But this isn't working. I messed around with it a little bit, but I ultimately abandoned this. I did later realize that there actually have been some changes that affect this in 4.1 or 4.0 maybe, that have stopped this from working. And one notable one is that if we look here in tasks, we can see this build solutions thing. I'm going to go more over these command line instructions later. But one thing I just want to quickly show you is here on the command line tutorial stuff for Godot, we can see build solutions is here. And if we open up the 3.6 version of this, so if you're ever here, you can go down here and read the docs for different versions. Pretty helpful. And I search for it again. Here's build solutions. This says build the scripting solutions. Okay, makes sense. Builds your game. But in 4.1, build the scripting solutions implies editor. So it implies that this is there, even if it isn't. What does that do? Starts the editor instead of running the scene. So this just doesn't work as it is, right? So there are some things that we can do, like we can maybe get rid of this because maybe it'll build anyway. I'm not sure. What I ended up doing was I ended up checking out this video here by Finepoint CGI. And this video here is how to use Visual Studio and VS Code with Godot 4. Great video, and this is what set me on my way. And instead of using C# tools for Godot and their building and debugging setup, actually this guy just uses .NET and uses core, the C# core, to do everything. And this is what got me on my way. This is what got me building my game and running it and debugging it and all that kind of stuff. However, there were some things that I wanted, some other functionalities that I wanted. I really loved that select scene option here, this thing here. I really loved that and I wanted that, but I couldn't really do that with core. And so that's where I started heading. So I started heading towards using core, but trying to find a way to incorporate the select scene. And so now we're back to the launch.json that I had before. And a lot of it was following the tutorial from Finepoint CGI. So I figure what we can probably do is just go through each of these things one by one and figure out what they mean, right? So first of all, these configurations, this array here, is just essentially these configurations up here, right? And each one of these objects is one of these. So the first thing we can see is that there's a name, and that's just launch. And this can be anything. Hi, YouTube. Hi, YouTube. So that's just whatever you put here is what you get up here. All right, so we can get rid of this part. This type here is what type of debugger are we going to be using. So in the previous one, you can see here in this build configuration from the C# tools from Godot, the type was Godot mono. And I think my understanding is that this is like the extension, right? So this is using this extension and some functionality and tools within this extension. That's what we're specifying when we write Godot mono. That's what I'm assuming here. Right? But now we're not using Godot mono, we're using core CLR instead, which is just the .NET core. The next thing is going to be a request, and requests can be either launch or attach. Now, how did I find this out? Well, if I go to this webpage here, and I'll put a link in the description below, and down the bottom, there's a launch.json attributes section. And if we go down here, we can see a bunch of these attributes that we can add to our build configurations. And these first three here are mandatory, and these are the three that we've gone over. The type, which is the type of debugger that we're going to be using, name, the name that appears in the drop-down box, and then request. So currently launch and attach are supported. So these are our two options here we have here for request. And then there's a bunch of other things here that we can also use. Okay, so this is like a good reference here that you can look at if you want to add other things, and we do indeed add some other things here. So for example, there's pre-launch task, and this here is just a task to run, so build. So it sounds like, okay, if we run build, then we just build, right? Not necessarily. I mean, that is what this task will do, but this task, what we're referring to here is what we specify here. Okay, so this is the task, and this is us calling the task. So there can be multiple tasks here with different names. This name is build. We can call this build hi YouTube, right? And then here we can run build hi YouTube, right? And that will work. So when we write build here, this is not really an operation. It's just the name of the task, and we're calling this task build. Now this stuff, I don't completely understand. I'm not gonna lie. All I know is that this is the default build configuration. If you have multiple, which one is the default one? It's this one. Apart from that, I don't really know everything here. I can see that we're passing a build argument, so that we should be running build, and these do different things. I don't really know what they do or why they do it. So not super, sure what happens here necessarily. But this is the name of this task. And for the pre-launch task, we're running build. And pre-launch is basically before we launch our application that we're about to launch, in this case it's going to be our game, we're going to run this task first. And so basically we're saying before we launch our game, build the game first. That's basically what this means. So we build the game. Now we have to specify, well, what are we going to run when we launch whatever? Here we've got a request to launch something. What are we going to run? And this is where you put in your path to your engine. So you want to run your engine. Godot engine. CWD, I believe, is current working directory. I think this is optional because it might just default to your current workspace folder. This variable here, this is a variable to your current workspace folder. I believe this is set by VS Code or something. I didn't set this myself. I don't think. I don't remember setting that. I don't know if this is necessary. Worst case scenario, put in the actual just path to your folders, which could be this with slashes the other way. I think that's the same thing, right? But I don't really need to do that. I could just use this thing here. Console is whether your debug outputs are going to be going to an internal console, or you can have like an external console. So if we go back to these options here, and we go down, we can see console is a attribute here, and we can use internal console, integrated, external, right? So right now I'm using internal console. So let's just test that real quick. So if I run this here. Sorry, I have a breakpoint set. You can see I've got GD print velocity string. We can see our game here. We can see that the velocity it's 0, 0. It's being printed many times here. If I move, it outputs the velocity, right? And that's the internal console that it's outputting to. But it's possible that you could, you want to output this to like an external command window, like a yeah, like a CMD window. If you wanted to do that, I think what you can do is external terminal in here, and then the engine itself, actually, I think it ships with a console.exe. So if I run console.exe with external terminal, then we've got no more output down here, I think, right? Yeah. And then we've got the output here in this window instead. But I don't need to do this. So I'm just going to set it back to how it was. Next is stop at entry, and this is whether or not the application should break as soon as the application is entered. If you set that to true, then it does that. When I set it to true, it doesn't do that. So I don't really know what the deal is, but that's a thing. And then we get to arguments. And these are the arguments that you can pass in. Now, like, what arguments can you pass in here? Well, because we're running the Godot engine, it's whatever arguments the Godot engine has and can accept. And these arguments are essentially the command line arguments. So if we go back to here, we looked at this earlier, it's all these here. All of these are different arguments that can be passed to the command line. And here's some examples of it. So it's like, here's like a headless example, etc., etc. For example, if you want to run a specific scene, you can just specify the scene that you want to be, run. So there's different things you can do here via the command line. And this part here, if you're not super familiar with this kind of stuff, this might seem kind of weird and it might not feel like it's a command line, but this really is just a command line. All right, we're just going to run this command and we're going to add whatever arguments here after the command. So let's do an example. So we've got the engine here. This is Godot. If I press enter here, we just run the engine. Now the project manager pops up, whatever, right? If we take a look at some command line variables here, we've got one called path here. Path to a project directory must contain a project.godot file. And what this does is it will just open up your game at that path, right? So if we go back to the command, to this here, this is my exe file. If I take the path to my game, path, quotes, and then the path to my game, this folder pixel game has the project file in it. Press enter. Well, now the game just runs to the default scene. But if I want to use a different scene, right? I wonder if I can do empty scene.tscn. That doesn't work. Oh, scenes / empty scene.tscn. And this is my empty scene. It works, right? So not only that, but we have like an editor. This is another run option here. Start the editor instead of running a scene. So like I've got a path to my project. I've got a path to my project here. If I want to run the editor instead, I can type in editor and then press enter. Now we're running the editor with my project, right? And so like what we're actually doing here, for example, if I have this one up here, which is where I run it with the editor, and I have my launch editor, you can see the arguments here. The arguments here are just what I wrote in the command line, right? There's nothing, are just what I wrote in this command line. All right, we start with the exe up here. And then the first thing we write is path, that's the first word. And then the next word is the workspace root, and that's the workspace root. And the next thing was editor, right? So we're just building a command string. That's basically it, right? And so that's why we can just come here to if we ever want to change up our build configurations, we just come to this page here, which has all the command line stuff, and we can work with whatever we want to do. If we want to run like a headless thing and debug a headless server or something like that, or if you want to do certain display options or, whatever, right? You can look through these yourself and you can make alterations to your build configurations yourself. You can make, new ones by copying one of these objects, paste it here, launch headless. We don't need the scene, headless, right? And then now I can launch, get rid of this here. And now I can just launch like a headless version of the game. And now I have like another build thing, right? So it's very easy. It's very easy once you break it down. And so that's the launch one. That's the launch version. And we've talked a little bit about the launch editor version, which is the exact same as the launch version, but we add this editor argument at the end as well, right? And then it just kind of works. Now this launch scene was a bit tricky because, you know, initially, if we open up the C# Godot launch.json file, that's just this one here. Ignore the red and everything. But in this launch select scene, there was this command here, command select launch scene. And that is what triggered the launch scene thing, right? And so initially I was like, well, if I'm going to make that, let's just, you know, put that in there, right? So initially, this is what I ended up with, right? But initially that wasn't there, right? It was like this, you know, and I just add that in, and I'm like, all right, well, we're just going to run this like launch scene command, I guess, whatever that means, and everything's going to be fine, right? Well, if we try that, we get select launch scene not found. So whatever this command is, isn't found, right? I sort of infer that this command, which creates the pop-up up the top here, just so I can show you, refresh your mind how it's supposed to look. If I click launch, I get all my scenes here, and I just click whatever I want and it runs it, right? So right, but at this point, that's not working, right? Select launch scene not found. So like, what am I, why isn't it found? I'm not really sure, right? And this is sort of when I started to realize that this type thing matters, right? So right now I'm using core.clr, but in here within the C# tools for Godot extension launch.json file, the type was Godot mono. Like, okay, so maybe I'm running two different extensions here. One is Godot mono, one is core CLR. Godot mono has access to select launch scene. Core CLR doesn't have access to select launch scene. I'm like, okay, well, why? I mean, the extension is here. Why can't it find it? So then I start thinking, well, maybe select launch scene is not inside core CLR, and core CLR can't look outside of core CLR. Or something, right? Or it just doesn't know what this is. So then I started thinking, well, maybe there's a way that I can call a function within an extension, call a function from C# tools from Godot extension, from the core CLR sort of extension. You know, is there a way that I can do that? If it can't find this, then like maybe there's a way that I can tell it where that function is and that it'll just work. And this was tough because I Googled, again, I didn't know I'm new to VS Code. I'm new to Godot. I didn't know what to Google. And so I tried to look for, how do I call an extension from another extension in VS Code for Godot? And it was like, I wasn't really getting the information that I wanted. And I was like, all right, well, you know, it's not too bad. You know, I guess I can make a bunch of different launch scenes that specify different scenes here, test scene, you know, .tscn or whatever, or scenes / you know, and I can make a bunch where instead of select scene, it's like test scene. And I do this for every scene in my game. And then I'll have a big fat, you know, list here. But I really wanted that. I really liked that functionality from C# tools for Godot. I really liked it. I really wanted it. And I couldn't sleep unless I did it. So I was like, all right, what do I do here? I'm going to look and see if this is actually a thing from within Godot mono. How do I do that? I'm not really sure. So what I did was I went to the C# tools for Godot page here. I've been here a million times. I looked through everything here. I couldn't find anything. And then I saw that they had their GitHub here. I was like, oh, I'll check out the code. All right. And in the code up the top here, I searched for select launch scene. We've got a couple hits here. This one here in packages.json was particularly interesting. So when I open this up, I see this variables thing. I don't know what that is. Select launch scene, but that's set to this, which looks like, to me, it looks like a package address going down to a function called get launch scene. So I thought, all right, well, if when Godot mono calls select launch scene, what they're actually calling is Godot.c# .get launch scene. So maybe if I just put that in instead, command Godot.c# .get launch scene. Maybe that will work. And lo and behold, it does work, right? So I learned a little trick here that you can indeed call functions from within this extension, call an external function that's in another extension. You can do that. So that's nice to know. So moving forward, if I ever feel like I need to do that, or if I'm in that situation, now I know that that's possible. And I have some vague idea how to do that. You know, I'm lucky that I had access to the code to find it. I'm not really sure how I would have figured this out otherwise, but that sort of works. So that's good. And yes, that's the launch select scene and how that works. Super good. Love it. All right, so this last build configuration is attached to process, and it's quite simple. Name is attached to process. Type, we're using core CLR, the debugger, and request is now attach instead of launch, right? We're not launching something, we're attaching to something now. And there's no other parameters to give. That's just kind of the end of the story here. And what this does, if you don't know what attached to process is, it's super handy. What it means is, you know, up until this point, right? If I launched something, I launched it with the debugger attached, already attached. So this is running and I can set a breakpoint, right? And then we hit that breakpoint. I can also run it without the debugger attached. All right, so now we're running it, but the debugger is not attached, right? And so we're not hitting the breakpoint, right? And that's Control F5 here, run without debugging, or F5 to start with debugging, right? So all these build operations here is like launching stuff with the debugger attached, but attaching is attaching the debugger to a process that wasn't already, you know, being debugged. So some use cases for this is, for example, if I open up the editor right now, and if I run the game, my debugger from VS Code has not been attached to this. I just ran the game from the editor, right? But maybe I want to debug this. There's a bug. I set a breakpoint that I want to check some values at. Well, now I've got this game running. I can click attach to process, click this. A list of my processes appear. Now I can search for Godot, and I can see the top one has editor in. Can you see this? So I know it's not that one. So it's the other one. If you don't have editor in the way that you've set your thing up, then just guess, I guess. So I know it's this one. So I'll click that and I attach to it and we hit the breakpoint. Okay. This is also really useful. For example, if we have a built version of the game, which I do right here. So if I run this is an actual exported version of the game from the engine, right? I'm not running this through the engine or anything. This is actually, and like maybe there's issues in this build, right? And I want to test that, right? Well, I can attach to this process too. Pixel game. And we hit the breakpoint. Okay. So, you know, having this attached to process is really, really nice as well. And glad that it works really good. The only thing with attach to process is if you're going to do that kind of stuff, especially with builds, the code that you have here needs to be exactly the same as what was in the build or something like that. Otherwise it won't really work. So in this particular case, I just built a version with this code, and so now I can attach to it. And so those are my build configurations. That's basically it. And actually, if you are a Godot or VS Code like veteran and you know a lot of this stuff, there's something that I would like to improve that I don't know how to improve. And that's this attached to process. I would love to have one more, which is like an auto attached to process, auto attached to game, that like ideally somehow can sort of sniff out, you know, an editor process or something, and then just attach that directly. Now I've seen that there's like, you can set like, so when I look at the C# tools for Godot, launch.json, they had their attach here where they could set a local host and a port. And I think Godot, you can start remote debugging and things like that. Look, I couldn't get this to work. I just couldn't. I tried to do it here too, and I just couldn't do it. So if anyone has any leads or any information about that, if there's a way for me to, each time I start the game here and I want to attach, I can just click, you know, auto attach to game, and it will just like attach automatically. If you have any leads for how that could work, or if it's doable at all, I would love any information about that. Leave it in the comments below. Or if it takes a little bit more to explain that, you could also check out my Discord, links in the description below, and do a post there, and I can check that out. So I hope that was informative and enlightening. And I hope that if you've been dealing and bashing your head against any build configuration stuff with VS Code, C#, and Godot, that this helps a lot. I really wanted all this information to be in just one place, because if I had sat down for 20-30 minutes and just watched this video, I would have been completely fine moving forward. But unfortunately, a lot of the information was kind of scattered. So there's links to resources in the description below, the ones that I referred to in this video. And I'm going to put timelines here as well, so you can easily go back and find the parts of the information that you needed if you need to refer back to this later, okay? If you enjoyed the video, if it helped at all, please leave a like. Do consider subscribing. I don't really make a lot of tutorial stuff. I don't plan on it, so maybe don't subscribe if that's what you're looking for. But I do other stuff, so consider checking out the other videos on the channel. Consider checking out my Twitch streams, twitch.tv/gemballs. And if you enjoy it, consider subscribing. Consider hanging around. And yeah, thanks for watching the video. Take care, everyone. Have a lovely day. Bye.